Welcome to the lighter side of the spectrum, the podcast that celebrates the multiple hats we wear and the juggling acts we perform in life. Whether you're parenting kids and teens on the autism spectrum, navigating the ever-evolving healthcare industry, or building a more inclusive and impactful world, this is your space to find connection, inspiration, and growth. Together, we'll share stories, tackle challenges, and explore how innovation and inclusion create better outcomes for everyone. Because no matter the spectrum, there's always a lighter side. Now here's your host, David Kaufer.
Hello again, everybody, and welcome back to the lighter side of the spectrum. Today's episode is really special because it sits at the intersection of history, disability, and a question that still matters right now. Many of us learned about Helen Keller in school. We were taught to see her as an extraordinary, inspirational, maybe even heroic figure, but too often we were not taught really the deeper lesson of her life. Helen Keller's story is not just about perseverance, it's about what becomes possible when someone is given access, support, belief, and a real path to communication. So here's a question at the heart of today's conversation. If we claim to honor Helen Keller today, why are so many non-speakers still being doubted, underestimated, and denied the communication access they need? And our special guest today is Brooks Hamilton. Brooks is Helen Keller's great-grandniece. Did I get that right, Brooks?
Yes, great-grandniece. Helen Keller is my great-grandfather's big sister.
That's so cool. Brooks is also someone who's stepping into this movement in her own way. She's been leaning and learning directly from non-speakers, volunteering in her community, training to be a communication partner, and thinking deeply about what Helen Keller's legacy should mean today. So our conversation is going to be about both myth and reality, support and access, legacy and responsibility, and what it would actually look like to honor Helen Keller in the present tense. So with all that, Brooks, welcome to the podcast. I'm so excited to have you here.
Thank you so much, David. I'm so excited to be here, and it's definitely a full circle moment. I've been listening to the podcast for over a year now, and it's been such an invaluable resource to me as I have tried to follow the accounts of self-advocates and their families on social media. So thank you for all of the work that you put into putting on this show. Well,
I appreciate that so much. It does mean the world to me. I'm so happy it could be a resource for you. And like I said, you've got an incredible legacy, obviously, Brooks. So for the people hearing your story for the first time, can we talked about, again, how you're related to Helen, but what was that legacy like growing up?
Yeah, so I definitely think that growing up, being Helen Keller's great-grandniece, I spent a lot more time than the average child thinking about what it would be like to be trapped inside of a dark, silent box, unable to communicate effectively with the outside world. And, considering how Helen Keller's legacy could have been different had her communication access never been, provided, or had it been denied at some point in her journey. And so, although I didn't grow up with anyone with autism or communication disabilities in my, direct family growing up, as soon as I heard about the stories of non-speakers, minimal speakers, unreliable speakers, it felt very personal to me because it just sounded so close to home with Helen Keller's story.
So growing up that way, did Helen Keller, was she like a historical figure in the family? How was she kind of referred to, was she a living presence? Talk about what was that like? Again, because not many people have that type of a person, in their family that they can talk about.
Yeah, well, I think one thing that was really special is that my mom got to meet Helen many times in person as a little girl. And so she, relayed stories to me when I was little about, meeting Aunt Helen. And she did say it was kind of strange as a little girl to meet someone with such different physical abilities than her own and to communicate in such a, different way, to have someone, placing their hand on your face, to listen to your words and learning to communicate, through sign language as well. And so I think that really instilled in me from a young age, I guess, the lesson to go the extra mile to communicate with peers who might be a little bit different than yourself, and just treating everyone as you would want your own family to be treated, I think is, a lesson that really was instilled into me.
What a great way to humanize it too, right? I mean, to kind of
Yeah.
hear your mom talk, to hear that firsthand story, because it is remarkable. I think I'd mentioned to you ahead of the podcast that Stone and I are listening to, the audiobook, was it My Life Story or my, I can't remember the exact title, but, the Helen Keller story.
Yes.
And it's just fascinating because, like I think a lot of people, I knew the basics, of Helen's journey because it is almost like I said, almost like mythological. You know what I mean? Like it's become such a huge story. It's just, I think
Yeah.
so many of us, like you said, just can't, you hear about it. I remember hearing about it as a kid. And again, you try to relate. Of course, you can't really, but it's just, but then to really get into the details, like you said, I never really knew that that's how she would, communicate, right? Like she would
Yeah.
actually, people would talk. She'd actually put her fingers on their lips or communicating, drawing on the hands, like taking notes. The story of my life. Thank you, Dave. I mean, that's just remarkable. I mean, it goes beyond, right? It's one of those things, the more you learn, the more
Yeah.
fascinating it becomes.
Absolutely. And it goes to show the power of, caring for other people. Anne Sullivan cared so deeply for Helen Keller and was so committed, and she presumed competence in Helen Keller and
Yeah.
knew that if I can provide this child with the tools that they need, that their disability, needs in order to access effective communication, if I can provide her with those tools, the sky's the limit. And so, yeah, it's just a really fascinating and I think important lesson that, stands true today and legally as well. These rights that are now protected and enshrined by the ADA. So it's no longer just an abstract,
No,
story.
it's very real. It's affecting a lot of people today. But one of the things, again, I really appreciate about you, Brooks, in our communication, what you've publicly talked about too, is you've been honest that, like a lot of people today, that you've carried some of the assumptions in the past about disability and intelligence and non-speakers to a certain degree. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So like I said earlier, I don't have anyone in my direct family with autism. And so I did have peers in public school who were part of special education programs and had different developmental disabilities like Down syndrome, autism, cerebral palsy, other disabilities. But I was told at the time by teachers and experts that these peers, I would hear things like, oh, so-and-so is your age, but he operates at the age of a 5-year-old level and he's never going to operate beyond that. And, being a little girl, I took those words to heart. I was used to listening to adults and trusting adults and believing adults. And so I didn't question, those assumptions when I heard them. And so unfortunately, I lived the first 27 years of my life under the assumption that, minimally speaking, unreliably speaking, non-speaking individuals, were typically cognitively impaired. And so when it wasn't until I learned about presuming competence and apraxia and spelling around the time that the telepathy tapes and the Spellers documentary were gaining a lot of traction, that I was struck by how wrong we have been and felt an urgent call to be a part of righting these wrongs. So.
Yeah, I was wondering if there was kind of that moment, that aha moment for you where you thought about like, gosh, what if we've all been wrong here?
Yeah, it was, it was sickening. It was stomach dropping. It was horrifying. I think it's one of the greatest civil rights violations that, our country has, seen. And Yeah, so it feels like a really important thing for me to stand with non-speakers in advocating for them and ensuring that they have access to the same, opportunities that Helen Keller had, which is access to effective communication that works for them. And so, yeah, I think that I will probably spend the rest of my life working towards that goal, and gladly so.
Yeah, it's so interesting because right after Stone began to communicate for the first time, right? Kind of that whole elation, the honeymoon phase. Of course, I was telling everyone and anyone I could about it, right? Just this incredible unlocking and everything that he was demonstrating. And I remember one of my colleagues, actually someone who's done copywriting for us for a number of years in the healthcare field. She was the one who actually said it reminded her of the Helen Keller story, that once, finally having access to a tool and having support was what he needed to become unlocked. Again, I never thought about it before, but I think that it's such a strong analogy, right? Because again, they hear the Helen Keller story, but I don't think, again, they really realize how much support went into getting her to the point where she became what
Oh my
people
gosh. There's so many similarities. It's crazy. Like, for example, before Helen Keller had access to sign language, she actually had come up with several of her own signs to communicate with her family about basic needs. For example, if she wanted bread, she would make, a cutting motion like someone was cutting a piece of bread, but similar to PECS systems or, image-based AAC systems, like what kind of autonomy and independence, will that provide for the rest of someone's life if they only have access to, a library of limited symbols or, symbolic
Right. Yeah. No, that's a
signs.
great point. Yeah.
And it wasn't until, Anne Sullivan had Helen Keller move in with her in the back house of, the Keller family home and go through weeks of intensive, facilitated hand over hand, signing into Helen's hand and scaffolded, supported, physically
Yeah.
facilitated learning where Helen slowly began to myelinate new pathways in her
Wow.
brain and gain
Really?
access to 26 letters, just like spellers do.
Hmm.
And I mean, you should see some of Helen Keller's earliest letters. It's not like she learned 26 letters and all of a sudden was able to communicate in full,
Right.
complex sentences. It's like she acquired, the ability to communicate this in a similar way to the way everyone does. We
Yeah.
acquire language through listening and then we're able to model it. And then over time, our ability to communicate more complex thought and more complex sentences, grows. And so the same was true for Helen Keller. And I think science has shown that, through neuroplasticity, the principle of neuroplasticity, that humans have the ability to build new pathways in their brain
Yeah.
and alternative ways to communication when there is like some sort of blockage, stopping you from communicating in the typical way. So how ableist is it to assume that that principle applies to everybody except autistic bodies or everybody except non-speaking, minimally speaking, or unreliably speaking bodies? That kind of arbitrary application of,
Yeah.
it works for these individuals and it's life-saving, for these individuals to take advantage of neuroplasticity and build new pathways to effective autonomous communication. But, if, these individuals want to do it, they can't. I just think it's the most discriminatory and ableist, take on communication.
Yeah. Well, of course, I agree with you wholeheartedly. And it's kind of amazing to see that, that there is that type of attitude that still persists. In my mind, I think that there's generally two camps that it falls under. The first is I kind of think you have this group of professionals, people who are still kind of, like you said, kind of ableist. They were either trained or taught that this is who this population is. Like they're never going to be able to think beyond first grade level, right? As I've talked about very, very often on the show, a teacher said that to me, about Stone's math, his math abilities. You kind of have those, right, who they just can't wrap their brains around it. And then you kind of have those who have self-serving interests, in terms of kind of preserving the status quo. It's at least my take. I don't know. Again, that's kind of a somewhat outsider now. Again, and you've been studying this. This is what I love, Brooks. I mean, like when you've dove in, you've taken it like full on. Like you're studying all of it, the neuroplasticity. I mean, you're not just like focusing on one aspect. You're looking at the whole picture.
Yeah. And, I've tried to spend as many hours as I can listening, like I said, to the stories of self-advocates and their families. And, I agree with you that there has to be a degree of self-preservation with some of these professionals, because the number of times that I've heard from families that they have spent, thousands of hours, tens of thousands of dollars on therapies that barely moved the needle for their family, if
Right.
they moved the needle at all.
If at all, right. Yeah.
If at all, if they didn't cause trauma, to the individual, because they were trying to do a therapy that didn't address the apraxic, condition that many of these individuals experience. There are, families who go through that, and then within like a year or two of spelling and maybe a couple $1,000s of investment, they're able to all of a sudden get to know their children for the first time, learn, about their families, greatest interests, passions, hopes, dreams, and to help them, begin the journey to making those things happen. And so, when I think of
we're good. You want to say anything, Brooks?
No. I'm excited to meet you.
Happy. He's super jazzed. He's listening in the other room.
Yes. No, and thank you for all your advocacy and leadership. You're such a great advocate. I'd love to meet you the next time you're in DC.
Oh yeah, he's been talking about that a lot. Maybe you're gonna sit. Good. Okay. Yeah, no, seriously, like for some reason, maybe because of the podcast, Brooks, he's been talking about. He wants to go to car airplane, Washington D.C. That trip was so special. Yeah,
come visit again. I would love to meet you guys in person. But yeah, there are, it's clear that if that is the truth for, so many families, there has to be billions and billions of dollars at stake for, these professionals. And so it makes sense that there is, a lot more playing into decisions being made about communication than what's best for these individuals.
Which is, of course, it's just
cruel.
Cruel, right? It's awful.
Inhumane, it's criminal. Yeah.
I just don't
corrupt.
understand. Yeah. How people can think that way. But I know people they rationalize in their own ways, to get there. I want to go back to Helen, because there was one story I think I mentioned to you that I thought was really interesting in her book. Again, which is relevant to today. And she talked about how she had written a story. I think it was one of her first articles or stories that she had published and got published in a magazine. It was really highly touted. But then there were claims that she plagiarized it, basically. And that was like this big scandal. And she had to go in front of, and then she had to go in front of basically kind of like a jury, right? Like of peer, it was like a peers at her school. It was, if I remember right, it was a mix of kind of teachers and other students. And then she had to go in front of them and try to like explain herself. But then they took away her support. Like she had to go in there by herself and try. And like, to me, this like, oh my gosh, this is history repeating itself with like the message passing test, right? Like
I actually didn't realize that in that story, they took away her support when she was to go in there and defend herself. But yeah, it's just so ableist to assume that, or to put individuals who, use support and assistive, communication devices, to put them in positions where that support is limited, and then to test their abilities, and then, to depending on how that test went, to determine, the direction of their education or the direction of their therapy or, whatever it is. Opportunities are on the line when these ableist tests are being performed, and it's just cruel, and it's not something that we put neurotypical students and children through. So, like, what are we doing?
Exactly. That's the parallel that I saw. Was, first of all, there was kind of the lack of presuming competence, right? There was just kind of the skepticism that she was capable of doing this, because I think there were probably those, again, who still thought because she, couldn't talk and, was deaf and blind or whatever, that they presumed that she was intellectually disabled, right? And so that's what kind of created the doubts in the first place. But the other point I want to make about that is that it traumatized her. She talked about how she was traumatized for a long time.
Yeah. And, like I said, I wish I knew that story better, because I can only imagine how I only knew that story from, the perspective that she did, get accused of the plagiarism, and that I was aware that, what happened, there is actually like a scientific name for recalling information and not exactly being able to remember where you picked it up from, or to even know that you're recalling information you've heard from the past. And so I remember, knowing that she felt very attacked, that people didn't understand this and presumed, the worst in her. But that's definitely traumatizing to be put in that situation without, to have to try to defend yourself without the supports that you depend on a daily basis. It's cruel.
It is cruel.
It's like making them jump through hoops. It's like, what are we doing?
What are we doing? Right. And again, it comes down to the presumption of competence, and then again, putting them into these high stress situations.
Yeah.
Right. Which, again, we've talked about. This doesn't even have to do with disabled people. I mean, all of us, when we're in high stress situations, react differently. I mean, that's why I
played basketball in high school.
I was gonna say, right, shooting free throws should be the easiest thing in the world, right?
I could make every single shot in practice, and in a game, I was like, 1 for 10 on free throws, just because that anxiety gets to me. And so imagine taking free throws during a game, but your entire future depends on it. And if you miss, and like you've said, there is no standard as to, failing or passing. So what is it? If you miss one free throw, do you no longer get to,
play basketball anymore? Right? Like you can't play basketball anymore. If you have this one shot, you have to make at least 70% of your free throws to prove that you really can shoot.
Yeah.
Go do it.
It's just horrifying. And the same thing with expecting students to be fully independent, in especially in like elementary school, middle school, high school. It's like expecting a basketball player to be at the D1 level to make the team for the first time.
Yeah,
you have to start somewhere. You need coaching. You need help. Years and years and years to get to that independent, place where you can really coach yourself and run the game yourself. And so, it's just ridiculous.
Absolutely. We're okay. Happy.
Don't agree.
Yeah. He's especially wired today.
Yeah.
Because of you. Well, so, Brooksy, like I said, you've jumped into this, once you kind of became aware and just said, this is something I want to do. I want you to talk about what that journey has been like, because again, it's not just like, oh, I'm going to help and maybe donate some money to this cause. You've jumped in and, become a communication partner and all kinds of things. I'd like you to talk about that.
Yeah, of course. I think that my story is particularly valuable for folks who would love to get involved and become an ally to this community, but don't really know where to start, because I am 27 years old. I live in Arlington, Virginia. I got a bachelor's degree in business and I work in sales. And like I said, I don't have anyone in my direct family or life with autism or developmental disabilities. So when I realized that I really wanted to get involved, I had no idea where to start or where I could begin to make an impact. So like I said, the first thing I did start doing, the best place to start is to follow, I believe, the accounts of non-speaking self-advocates and their families online, just because we've already talked about how much misinformation there is out there about, the non-speaking population, that it's a really good place to start if you want to be the best ally and advocate that you can. It's the best thing to do is to learn directly from non-speakers. And then soon after that, I think my social media algorithm kind of picked up on things because I came
as
across,
it does, right?
I came across a video of an older gentleman who was volunteering with individuals with different abilities. And he was just doing like recreation programs in a local recreation, I guess, like clinic. And it was called therapeutic recreation. And so I thought, that seems like something that I could do, like hang out with folks on the weekends, do things like bowling or play sports or play games. And so I just Googled therapeutic recreation, Arlington, Virginia, and I saw a bunch of opportunities. In fact, it was all listed on the Parks and Recreation page.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the Arlington County
Nice.
Parks and Recreation page. They have a bunch of government funded programs, but then they also have a list of community resources that are just, community organizations that aren't affiliated with the Parks and Rec department. And there were a ton of different opportunities in my area. So I took a look at all of the different opportunities and the different commitments involved, and found some opportunities that seemed like a really good fit. They were one-off weekly. It's not like I had to commit to a whole year-long program or a intense training or something. And so I just started showing up to some of these events like bowling on the weekends, and I absolutely fell in love with it. So much so that I started attending like Saturday, Sunday, and every single week, to the point where I probably spend like 6 to 8 hours a week volunteering. And
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's become such a wonderful, important part of my life. I feel like my life has so much more meaning and purpose and, value than it did before. Before I was just kind of living for myself, and now I'm, living and trying to create a better life for, a lot more people and, my community. And so, it's been
That's so wonderful. And I know you've also had a chance to form some real relationships within the community too. And talk about that. Like what are some of the things you've kind of learned or experienced that just maybe not necessarily surprised you, but has really maybe changed you personally?
I've developed a lot of really close relationships in the community, and I think one of the most special things that I have learned that's really opened up my world is just realizing how narrow verbal communication is and how limited its scope is. Some of, the most wonderful moments in the past year I've spent outdoors, enjoying an activity with one of my non-speaking friends. And in those moments, instead of searching for the words to describe them, I look around and I see, all of the millions of different things that are coming together to make this moment so perfect and beautiful. And then I look at my friend and I just think, what a gift that we both are experiencing this together. And words could never paint this picture as beautifully as just experiencing this moment can. And so that's really opened up my world and helped me to see how limited language really is. But I've learned so many different things. I think, seeing motor coaching firsthand, the value of motor coaching is something that's been really valuable in my volunteering. The number of times that, an individual will be trying to participate and maybe having a little bit of trouble. And then once you provide a little bit of motor coaching, they are able to exceed the expectations of all of their, able-bodied peers, friends, family in the room. It's pretty amazing. Like, I was playing catch one day with someone. I heard that this young boy loved to play catch. And so I tossed him the ball and said, okay, no, throw it back to me. And he threw it in the opposite direction, and I had to run and chase after the ball. And then I ran back and said, okay, good throw. Next time, I want you to try and throw the ball right here, right to my hands, right here. and I'm going to catch the ball, and then I'm going to throw it back to you right here at your chest so that you can catch it. And then we can keep throwing it back and forth like that. And so I said, okay, 1, 2, 3, throw the ball to me right here. And he threw it right to me. And when his parents picked him up that day, I told his dad, and his dad was like, can't play catch.
Really?
Yeah. And this kid wasn't like super small, he was, maybe like 12 years old. And so it just amazed me, that this family had probably tried so many different things, or tried so many times, throw the ball, let's play catch, throw the ball, and failed. But the second that motor coaching was introduced in the equation, all of a sudden, it unlocks the ability to participate. And so I've just seen that on so many different levels that I think, like, in volunteering, presuming competence is assuming that someone wants to be there, assuming they want to participate, and assuming they can participate if given the appropriate tools or coaching to do so.
No, that's a great example. And it's because I can relate to it, something I've had to learn. I mean, I've learned it to different degrees, obviously, over the years, but it's really accelerated the last couple of years with communication, with motor-based communication, understanding, like you said, apraxia. Like, that is such, like, it's one of those things where it's like, why was this such a secret? Why was it, or better, why hasn't this been understood or explored more than the past 10 years, which is really when it seems like, more of us have become familiar with it. And it's just like, because it explains so much. It explains so much.
And, I listened to the Barry Prezant podcast, and he's like, why did we go to the motor place with all these other disabilities, but not with autism?
Right.
And we do actually acknowledge that people with autism have sensory motor disabilities. So, like, what is taking the medical community so long to really acknowledge it to the degree that non-speakers need it to be acknowledged? Like, why is apraxia such a small part of the conversation with professionals? Like, I've talked to families who actually did get maybe not a diagnosis of apraxia.
Yeah,
but,
we did.
But had no idea what that meant, was given no explanation of it, And so, I mean, to me, that feels like malpractice at, a grand level.
Yeah, no, that's funny, because that was exactly the same for us. Stone got a diagnosis from a doctor. He was probably, I don't know, 6, 7, 8, somewhere around there. And it was apraxia of the speech. And of course, the speech therapist used it. And then, this is one of those ironic things, Brooks, is, when he was doing speech therapy, of course, they were trying to really work on the motor, the mouth. And so they're like, doing all of this stuff, like, doing like physical prompting. And yet, they're the ones who are like somehow like, prompting them to spell, and to spell using a letterboard is, wrong. But like, you can actually manipulate their mouth to get them to talk. But that's totally cool.
It's ridiculous. And there's prompting is used in pretty much every form of teaching that I've seen in, like common, education systems. And so again, it just feels ableist, and it feels like we're holding, disabled individuals to different standards, to double standards.
Double standards, right.
So
talk about being a communication partner, because I think that's fascinating. I love that you actually, again, dove in and have trained to become a communication partner.
Yeah, so that's definitely an exciting journey to be on. I first considered taking that step like a year ago, wanting to take a training. But again, I was really just dipping my toes in the water of beginning to volunteer, and knew that it probably wasn't quite the right time, that I probably had a little bit more learning to do before I really took the full step into, taking a CRP training and working with non-speakers on, spelling to communicate or typing for communication. But a while into my volunteering journey, I did become friends with a speller who has been spelling for several years. And his mom really wanted any, new folks hanging out with him, spending time with him to learn how to spell to communicate so that he, his communication method was honored and he felt included. And so it really felt like a perfect time for me to kind of take that leap and start learning. And so I first went to Elizabeth Bonker's Communication for All Academy that she has it's an amazing set of videos that were
It's amazing what they've done. Yeah.
on YouTube to teach, families how to spell to communicate with their non-speakers. And so that's the first set of resources that I use, to start becoming a CRP with my friend. And I've also started teaching one of my other non-speaking friends from volunteering how to spell. And so he's still in the acquisition phase.
Wow.
He's only, within about, we've only been spelling together for about 12 weeks, but he's absolutely crushing it and he's made a lot of progress. And the great thing about the Communication for All is they have a Facebook page with tons of certified practitioners there to provide you with direction. So you can post videos of yourself and get feedback. And they even offer like 15-minute free lessons with practitioners so that you can make sure you're not, going off in the wrong direction and you're really doing the best that you can to support your non-speaker.
What has surprised you as far as being a communication partner? I'm really curious because, again, so many people, when they kind of see it, right? Like, again, if you're not familiar with the methodology in general, people just think you just sit there and you kind of just drop the letterboard in front of someone, right? And then they just start spelling and they, because people do that. They're like, oh, here, I'll grab the letterboard. I'll spell with stone. I'm like, it doesn't work that way.
No. It's so much work to learn how to spell and to be a good communication partner. And it's really important before you begin the journey of spelling with a non-speaker, it's really important to make sure that you have done the due diligence of getting a training, taking those online courses that are available, because you do a major disservice to the non-speaker if you show up without the right tools to communicate with them. And so, there are a lot of families out there that get really excited about spelling and are asking, where can I order a letterboard? And
exactly. Right.
First piece of advice would be,
send me a video. And can I see a video how to, can someone show me a video of them doing it or something?
Yeah. So, definitely the first piece of advice I would give would be to consult a practitioner. And, if you're not able to, afford a practitioner or there isn't a practitioner in your area, then definitely look to some of the resources like Communication for All that are available online. But it definitely surprised me how complicated it was learning to spell. The first time that I hung out with my friend, who's a non-speaker, and he spells, he was like poking at the board. And so I just thought, should I pick this up? And so I picked it up for him and was like, are you trying to say something? And it was only weeks later that I realized how foolish of me that was to pick up the board.
You didn't know?
I didn't know, but I didn't realize that it takes you have to go through you have to start over from square one. So just because I began spelling with a speller who's been spelling for years and is open with multiple different, practitioners and communication partners, he and I have started at square one. We're going through known questions only, reading through lessons, answering direct questions from the text. And really taking our time. And we're not going to move forward until he's at, 90 to 100% accuracy with those known questions, so that, our communication is reliable and it's not, putting stress on him to communicate in a way that's not effective yet.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. I mean, it's hard, especially for families. I understand that. I was the same way, right? I mean, as soon as you get access, you want full access, right? Like you're just like, let's go. I want to get to know my kid, like you said. And and it's hard to be patient.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, the way I kind of told myself is like, well, I've waited this long, for him to become unlocked. I can wait a few more, I'd rather do it right. Cause you do hear stories of sometimes where there are setbacks where people would be a rush or they're not trained, and it creates setbacks, unfortunately.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the areas that, we can align with, like, I think everyone wants to protect. Like, no one who supports spelling is saying, like, everybody should go and spell, everybody start spelling, without the right
Yeah.
tools.
Right.
Like, I think that people who advocate for spelling care just as much about best practice and avoiding influence and, protecting autonomy as much as folks on maybe the other side of the issue feel. So I think that's an area where we can kind of come together, is understanding we both have those same priorities, and
We
those
do.
priorities are being taken very seriously by by S2C. I asked Elizabeth Foster's
Yeah.
organization. I
Yeah.
took the prerequisite course, and, it was very, uh, like, influence and avoiding influence was one of the number one things that was talked about. Like, influencing a speller is the greatest disservice that you can do. And it's absolutely important and critical to make sure that you're avoiding it. But at the same time, not offering spelling is, inhumane and criminal and
Yeah. It's
neglectful.
it's a challenge to be sure. Especially when you start talking about having it in schools,
Yeah.
which it should be, right? I mean, you should be able to have this methodology, but there are some logistical challenges that, like I've talked to Don Marie about, and kind of, because we've talked about, as we're getting more access, as there's more awareness out there, we're starting to see some cracks finally. Some
Yeah.
school districts that are saying, okay, we'll allow it, but what do we do about this communication partner piece of
Yeah.
it? And the challenge is twofold sometimes for parents. Is either, first of all, if you're able to get school district to agree to pay for maybe a separate communication partner, you have to find that person. Like, you have to find, and then, as you know, Brooks, you've done it. That person has to go through training with the student, right? Like, that takes a long time for them. So that's just one of those logistical challenges. It's not
But also not a crazy long time. And,
not a crazy long time. No.
no. And, when you read the ADA, I think that it, is well in alignment with, what is
Absolutely.
expected by the ADA.
And
Spelling practitioner training, RPM training. I think the first level is maybe like 6 to 12 weeks or something. I'm not very familiar with that, but I know that the
yeah,
IAS
give or
training is
take.
like
Yeah.
6 months, give or take. And I know that speech language pathologists go to school for much longer. And so, a
Absolutely.
6-month training for to give individuals the right to communicate in schools is, small beans to me.
Yeah. Yeah. So, we had mentioned before kind of the legal fights. And of course, we're in the middle of one right now as we're recording this, the big fight in New York for the communication rights bill. Give me your thoughts about this. I know it's been very much top of mind for you. You've been involved in, utilizing social media as much as you can, but kind of share your thoughts about what we see going on in New York and the impact you think it could have.
Yeah, well, I've been really excited about this bill for the last year because I heard it being talked about and was so excited
Yeah.
that a state was finally going to set precedent to right the wrongs that, non-speakers have been experiencing in schools and in Title II, institutions. I was, so sad and
Right.
horrified to see the amendments that Senator Fahey made because it was such a bait and switch. There were
Oh,
so many
yeah.
people who had gotten together in support of this amazing bill. The bill passed unanimously. The Assembly passed the bill unanimously last year.
That doesn't happen for anything, right? Like, that's
So
amazing.
for Senator Fahey to go in and add, these amendments a couple days before this bill is supposed to be voted on, was very sneaky. It was totally a bait and switch. I
Yeah.
think it was, I I'm glad that her colleagues are seeing the outrage because I think that it was also, an unfair thing for her to do to her colleagues. If a bill was passed
Right.
unanimously by the assembly,
That's a great point.
who are you to go in and make changes? Is this your agenda that you're trying to pass, or is this New York's agenda that you're trying to pass? Because New York seems to have spoken its mind, but Senator Fahey seems to be taking
Think
notes
otherwise. Yeah.
from people with other
Other interests, right?
yeah,
I mean, there's
exactly.
other agendas. We know
Yeah.
that there's been heavy influence there, unfortunately.
So I'm very excited about, the fact that this bill is being worked on, and, that the assembly is going to be re-voting on it on
Yeah.
Wednesday on the good version of the bill. So, I'm very excited for that. And I've been reaching out to lawmakers in New York every free moment that
Yeah.
I can.
Yeah.
And it's been great to, they're listening. I've gotten some responses,
Oh, good.
but yeah, it's really important for me to get the message across to lawmakers that it's absolutely hypocritical for our country to champion Helen Keller as a disability rights, hero, and then simultaneously undermine access, to the same opportunities for non-speakers today. It's just hypocritical and, unacceptable. There's a statue of Helen Keller in the Capitol Rotunda. She's one of the two people representing the state of Alabama. And so,
That's so
you can't
cool.
have that statue up and then at the same time, prohibit
Yeah. Kind of
individuals.
tarnish the legacy, really, right?
Yeah,
By having these restrictions. Were you there for the unveiling of the statue?
I was. Yeah. Yeah. My family was invited to the
What was that
Rotunda for
like?
the unveiling of the statue. It was really cool. I remember we got to meet Nancy Pelosi, and it was a really special, I was much younger, and so I didn't quite understand, just how.
Yeah. I was a kid. How old were you when?
Yeah, I was around 11 years old, I
Okay,
think,
yeah.
when I
Old
went.
enough to kind of understand, but not really.
Yeah.
Understand the full impact. Like, it was cool, but like you didn't have the whole.
But it was certainly cool when I saw when I saw the statuary hall, and I saw all of these statues of mostly older, white, able-bodied
Yeah,
men.
right,
You see
right.
the statue of this little girl. The statue was Helen Keller at the water pump, and she was little
Mhm.
and had, I think, a bow in her hair and a dress on. And it was it seemed like a really symbolic moment of progress in our country to see,
Yeah,
this disabled female voice taking place in, the halls of our government, among the voices of all these, among the faces of all these men and voices who have dominated for so long.
yeah, older white guys.
Yeah.
Right.
Older,
They're
able-bodied white guy.
able-bodied white guys. You're right, right. Well, let's segue to our segments, our weekly segments. I know that
Yeah.
you said you brought one, so we're going to start off with our tip of the week.
Hey parents, gather around, it's time to speak. We're here with your tip of the week. Strategies and wisdom just for you. Autism parents, we know what you go through.
All right, we've got our tip of the week, and Brooks, I know you came prepared for this. You've been a listener of the show, so you know the drill.
Yes. Yeah. My tip of the week this week is to presume competence. Presume competence can mean, different things in different scenarios, but the gist of it is, presume that, your non-speaker wants to engage and participate as much as anyone else would, and to try to give them all the tools that they need to be able to do that. So, if you need to explore motor coaching, look into that. I think co-regulation is also a really important thing. Like one of the ways that I presume competence at my volunteering is co-regulating with individuals during some of their more challenging moments, so that their days are not like reduced to their hardest moments. I find that when you acknowledge that someone's feeling, a little bit of dysregulation, allow the space and say, you know what, I'm here for you. I'll sit right here next to you, and we'll wait till we feel better. But then once we're feeling better, I'm going to assume that you want to continue on with the day and, not let this not let this get in the way of our plans. And that has really, I think, opened up a lot of wonderful, I think it's like, I think so many of the individuals that I work with are used to when they have a challenging moment, it kind of brings the day to a halt. They have to go home. They may get separated from the group. And I think that it's really empowering to allow these individuals to feel their feelings the way that I would want to feel mine, the way that you may want to feel yours, and then experience the same support and friendship and companionship that, we would want to experience. So yeah, presuming competence and I guess being a friend, co-regulating would be my tip of the week.
Oh, I love that. And Brooks, you have such a connection and understanding this community that really blows me away. I mean, and like I said, we've talked about that you're obviously working on being a communication partner, but when you look ahead, where do you see yourself? Do you see becoming more involved, or, what do you see for your future here? Because I hate to just simplify so you get it, but I feel like that there's just such a strong connection. I mean, talking about co-regulation, even in the way that you do, a lot of parents I talk to still don't really understand it to that level.
Yeah. I think that, again, listening to the stories of non-speakers has been really helpful. For example, I've got that advice from non-speakers about co-regulating and being there during some of those more challenging moments and maybe not trying to intervene, but just allowing the space for it and still, saying, I'm here. I'm going to make sure you're safe. I'm not going to leave you alone. And I'm also going to be a friend and I'm going to be here, when you're ready to come back and, join the group. I would love, to take my role in, being an ally and advocate for this community even further. I am starting a spelling practitioner training with the Mouth to Hand Learning Center run by
Awesome.
David next week. And so that course runs a minimum of 6 months, but longer if you're not quite at the place that you need to be to graduate from the practitioner training at that point. And so, I think that after I complete that training, I think I'll have a better idea of, the best next steps that I can take.
Where you can take it. Yeah.
Yeah. But I'm hoping that, in the meantime, I would love to try to bring spelling, once I have the right skills, to as many families as possible that may not be able to afford it. I really just feel that feels like my calling, like one area that I would really love to go into. And then also, I have a big passion for individuals who are above the age of 21 who may have aged out of other services.
Yeah,
just I think there's such a big drop off in some of the services that are available. Even in my volunteering, many of the programs are meant for individuals for 10 to 18, but these individuals don't stop aging. And so they've been going to these programs every single week for, 5+ years. And then all of a sudden when you turn 18, the opportunities disappear. And so I think there's such a great need there that, I would love to try to focus extra on filling that need.
I love it. Yeah, and it is a huge need. I mean, just kind of, again, as a country and a society that we need to address. Like you said, these services stop for so many of these individuals when they turn 18, maybe when they turn 22 now, in terms of when they age out of the high school, requirements. But then what, right? What are they supposed to, what are they supposed to do? Some of them, receive job training, but there's so many other opportunities out there, and these should be supported, right? We should find ways to pay for it, to train people, because it's not a small population we're talking about.
No, it's not. 30 million non-speakers worldwide, right?
Yeah, it's a big group. All right, well, we're gonna. I want to do a quick fact or fiction before we wrap up.
Get QuickTime ready, and here we go. This is Autism Fact or Fiction. We're breaking down what's real, what's rumor, and what might surprise you. Let's go.
All right. So I don't know, Brooks, if you have any fact or fiction. I know you brought it a tip of the week, but did you think of any fact or fiction you wanted to throw out there?
Okay. Fact or fiction? IQ tests can accurately measure the intelligence of an individual with apraxia.
That's
Fiction.
a big old fiction. Yeah.
Big old fiction. There is no way to accurately measure the intelligence of an individual who does not have the motor ability to demonstrate their intelligence. So, yeah, that one's important to me.
That's a good one. And mine is, if someone cannot communicate independently right away, we can't trust that what they're expressing is really their voice. And that's obviously another big old fiction, right? We know their voices are in there. It's just a matter of helping, go through the process to help them communicate.
I have a little quote from Helen Keller here, and she was advocating in Washington, D.C. for the AFB. She said, "I tell you, the chief handicap of the blind is not blindness, but the attitude of seeing people towards them. The fact is, blind people are just like seeing people in the dark. If the lights in this hall were suddenly turned off, you would be in the dark, wouldn't you? But you would still have the tastes, desires, ambitions, and passions of the seeing, wouldn't you? If you could only realize this, you would have a better understanding of the problems of the sightless." And so she goes on to encourage people to put themselves in the position of the blind and to treat people who are blind like they would want to be treated if they were in that position. And she says, "I was once without hope or joy. I was alone, imprisoned in a dark, silent world because no one could communicate with me. Then a friend came to me, and with a little word dropped from her fingers, a ray of light from her soul, I found myself, found the world, and found God. It is because my teacher cared about me that my own life has been happy in spite of deafness and blindness." So, yeah, I think, it's absolutely fiction to assume that, it's just ableist. It's fiction. Every human has a personality and has their own, mind and has things to communicate. And it's just cruel to,
They have hopes, they have dreams, they have views, they have, senses of humor. They have all of these things that make us human. Like you said, Brooks, it's all inside. It's really, I think, up to us to help them, help unlock them and help support that when they do become unlocked. I mean, that's like, to your point earlier, the biggest travesty in terms of those who are fighting against it. It's just like, it's inhumane to try to stop it.
Absolutely. And, when it comes to like medical practitioners and experts, like the right thing to do, especially when neuroplasticity shows that this is a scientifically probable, way for individuals to be able to learn to communicate, the right response is to welcome it, with like lots of research and, invest a lot of time and energy into, doing more with it, not shutting it down with a few old, like outdated studies. It seems ridiculous to me to try to negate mountains of like established neuroscience with like a handful of small studies that, are not like comprehensive in any manner.
Like you said, they're outdated and in a lot of ways just irrelevant to what's being discussed now.
100%.
Yeah. Well, one last question. Like I said, I know we could talk forever, but I'm curious. What does your family think about what you're doing? Like, how does your friends and family? What's their response been to this journey that you've been on, Brooks?
Yeah, I mean, I think my friends are really excited about it for sure. And my friends have been volunteering with me as well and getting involved.
Oh, great.
Yeah, so they're starting to make their own, impacts. And then my family, my mom has been really proud, especially since she knew Helen. She definitely feels like I'm doing the best job that I can to, continue Helen's legacy and to try to have some of those same breakthroughs, or help facilitate those breakthroughs for, people who deserve the same opportunities that Helen had. So yeah, my whole family has been really supportive of it. And we're really excited to see what happens next with, the Communication Bill of Rights and we'll be celebrating big time.
Yeah, progress is happening. It's going to continue. And I was just going to say, it's funny you mentioned that, Brooks. I was just going to say that you're not treating Helen Keller's legacy as something that's like frozen in the past, right? You're saying, hey, what does it require of us now?
Yeah.
And you're walking the walk, you're listening, learning, stepping into the work, kind of turning that legacy into service. And, it's true that not every legacy gets carried forward that way. And that's, one of the things that makes your voice so meaningful. And you're putting your voice out there. I mean, you've written articles, you've written letters of support. I mean, you're really being there. So I want to thank you personally and also from the community for helping us, think more deeply about what it means to honor Helen Keller, remarkable person, obviously, but not just in memory, but also in action.
Thank you.
Yeah. And thank you again for being here. Such a pleasure, such an honor. I know we'll be talking more, offline as to working together on these and all the Bill of Rights. And there's a lot of work to be done. We'll have to get you back on here. But thanks again, Brooks. It's been great.
Thank you so much, David.